Somewhere right now, in a quiet room, lit only by the blue glow of a phone screen. Someone is lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, feeling more empty than they have ever felt in their entire life. They don't know why, they can't explain it. They just feel far away from everything, from everyone, from God, from hope itself. And what they don't realize is that this exact feeling, this exact moment of numb, quiet distance, was not an accident. It was engineered, not by bad luck, not by circumstance, but by something ancient, something endlessly patient, something that has spent thousands of years perfecting a single weapon so effective that most people go their entire lives without ever noticing they've been hit by it. And here is the part that will genuinely disturb you. It is not the weapon you think it is. It is not fire. It is not sin. It is not even temptation. Stay with me until the very end, because what you're about to hear will change the way you look at every dark moment you've ever lived through. And if you leave before the end, you will only get half the picture, and half the picture is exactly what keeps this weapon alive. Ask anyone what the devil's greatest weapon is, and you will get the same predictable answers. Lust, anger, greed, pride, addiction. The 7 deadly sins wrapped up in a red costume with horns and a pitchfork, whispering, "Just do it," in your ear. That is the cartoon version. That is the version designed to keep you looking in the wrong direction. The same way a magician waves one hand so loudly that you never notice what the other hand is doing. Because if the real weapon was simply tempt people into sin, it would actually be a fairly weak strategy. Humans have willpower. Humans have conscience. Humans have the ability to say no, to resist, to fall down and get back up. Sin on its own is survivable. People sin every single day and still go on to live meaningful, faithful, redeemed lives. So if temptation alone isn't enough to destroy a person, then temptation cannot be the true weapon. It's just the bait, the opening move, the part everyone is trained to watch for. The actual weapon is something that gets deployed after the sin happens, in the exact moment when your guard is completely down. Something that works in silence, something so quiet you don't even register it as an attack, because it doesn't feel like an attack at all. It feels like the truth. And that, right there, is what makes it the most dangerous weapon ever created. Not that it lies to you, but that it tells you something that feels more honest than anything you've ever heard about yourself. That weapon is despair disguised as self-awareness. It is the whisper that comes right after you fall, not before. It doesn't say go and sin. It waits. It watches you make the mistake, watches you feel that first flash of shame, and then, in that exact vulnerable second, it leans in and says something far more dangerous than any temptation ever could. You again? Really? After everything you know, after everyone you claim to be, you did that? You're not actually a good person. You're a fraud. You've been pretending this whole time. Do you really think you deserve to ask for forgiveness after this? Do you really think prayer means anything coming from someone like you? And here's the part that makes this weapon so devastating. It feels true. It doesn't feel like a lie whispered by something evil. It feels like finally seeing yourself clearly, like the mask has finally come off and you're staring at the real you for the first time. And that is exactly the trap, because the moment you believe those words, you don't just stop sinning less, you stop trying at all. You stop reaching for the very thing that could have pulled you back out. Let me tell you about someone. We'll call him Ali, though he could be anyone, in any city, in any decade, in any part of the world. Ali grew up praying 5 times a day, not perfectly, not always on time, but consistently, the way most people are consistent, with gaps, with excuses, with the occasional missed prayer he'd make up for later, the way normal, imperfect, ordinary believers live. He read Quran on Fridays. He felt, in a quiet, unspoken way, like he was on the right path, even if it wasn't a perfect one. Then life happened, the way it always eventually does. A friendship turned toxic. A late night turned into a habit. A habit turned into something he swore to himself he would never become. Something he used to judge other people for when he saw it happen to them. And one night, after doing something he never imagined himself capable of, he sat on the edge of his bed at 4 in the morning, and instead of feeling the urge to pray, to cry, to ask for mercy, he felt something colder. He felt disqualified. He thought, what's the point now? I've already ruined it. Praying after this would just be hypocrisy. And so for the first time in his life, he didn't pray, not because he stopped believing in God, but because he believed with complete certainty that God no longer wanted to hear from him. That is the moment. Sit with that for a second, because that is the exact moment the real weapon does its work. Not the sin itself, the silence that follows it, because here's what nobody warns you about. The enemy does not need you to sin forever. He only needs you to believe, even once, that you are no longer worth saving. Because once you believe that, you do the rest of the damage yourself, with your own hands, without anyone even needing to push you further. You stop praying, so you stop feeling connected. You stop feeling connected, so the next sin feels easier. Because what's one more when you've already convinced yourself you're already lost? You stop talking to the people who love you, because you're terrified they'll see what you really are. You stop opening the book that once gave you comfort, because it feels like it belongs to a version of you that no longer exists. A version you're not sure you're allowed to go back to being. Piece by piece. You don't get pulled into darkness. You walk into it yourself. One quiet withdrawal at a time, believing the whole way that you're simply being honest about who you really are. And this is where it gets even more disturbing, so don't look away now, because this next part is the piece most people never learn until it's already cost them years. This weapon has a name in the old texts, and it isn't just despair, it's isolation. Scholars across centuries from every corner of the Islamic tradition have pointed to the exact same pattern again and again. The enemy cannot destroy a person who stays connected, connected to God, connected to community, connected to the people who know their struggles and love them anyway. Connection is armor. Isolation is what removes the armor without you ever noticing it's gone. So instead of trying to defeat your faith directly, which is nearly impossible when you're surrounded by people who remind you of who you are, the strategy shifts to cutting the rope quietly, one fiber at a time. Convince you to hide the sin. Convince you that admitting it out loud, even to yourself in prayer, is too shameful. Convince you that distance from God is safer than facing Him in this state. It is the same tactic used in every form of manipulation throughout human history. Isolate the target from anyone who could interrupt the spiral, and the spiral does the rest of the work on its own. No further effort required. Think about how this shows up in ordinary life, far beyond dramatic stories like Ali's, because this is not just a religious phenomenon, it is a human one. The person who misses one workout and tells themselves, I've already ruined the week, might as well eat whatever. That is the exact same mechanism. The student who fails one test and starts telling themselves, I'm just not smart enough for this, and quietly stops showing up to class. Same mechanism. The person who says one unkind thing to their spouse, and instead of apologizing that night, lets the silence stretch into 2 days, into 2 weeks, into a marriage that slowly goes cold. Same mechanism. The entrepreneur whose first business fails, who then spends the next 5 years telling everyone, I'm just not built for this, never trying again. Same mechanism. This weapon is not exclusive to religious guilt. It is the master key to almost every kind of self-destruction human beings experience, in every culture, in every era, in every corner of the earth. One mistake, followed by a whisper that says, this is who you really are, followed by a slow, voluntary withdrawal from everything that could have pulled you back. The mistake was never the real danger. The withdrawal was, every single time. Now here is the turning point, the part where everything flips, so pay very close attention, because this is the piece that changes everything you just heard, and it's the reason this weapon, as powerful as it is, has an expiry date the moment you understand it. If isolation and despair are the real weapons, then the counter-weapon, the thing that makes all of this collapse instantly, is almost embarrassingly simple. It is not perfection. It is not becoming sinless. It is not waiting until you feel clean enough to come back. The counter-weapon is speed, immediate return, without waiting, without negotiating with your own shame first. There is a reason that across Islamic teaching, mercy is described not as something you have to earn back slowly through some invisible scoreboard of good deeds outweighing bad ones, but as something so vast that a single sincere turn back in the same moment as the mistake is enough to dissolve it entirely. The tradition doesn't say wait until you feel worthy, then approach God. It says the opposite. Approach precisely because you don't feel worthy. Because feeling unworthy and still choosing to show up anyway is the entire point. That single act, showing up broken instead of hiding broken, is the one move the whisper cannot survive, because the whisper's entire power depends on you staying quiet, staying hidden, staying alone with it. The instant you break the silence, the weapon has nothing left to work with. But here's where most people get it wrong, and this is worth pausing on, because it's the part that trips up even sincere, well-meaning people. They hear "come back immediately," and they picture some dramatic, tearful, cinematic return, the kind you see in movies, with perfect words and perfect posture. And when their real moment comes, messy and awkward and nowhere near as composed as they imagined, they think, "This doesn't count. This isn't good enough. Let me wait until I can do this properly." That single thought, "let me wait until I can do this properly," is the whisper again, just wearing a different disguise. It sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds like patience, but it is simply despair buying itself more time. There is no properly. There is only now, in whatever condition you're in, however unpresentable you feel. Let me give you the other story now, the one nobody tells as often, because it isn't dramatic in the way collapse stories are, but it is far more important. And it's the story that actually matters if you're watching this while carrying something heavy right now. There was another person, someone who fell into something arguably worse than what Ali experienced. A habit that had taken years to build, one that had cost relationships, self-respect, sleep, and years of quiet suffering nobody around them ever saw. And one night, at the exact same rock-bottom moment Ali experienced, something different happened. Instead of thinking, "I've ruined this, there's no point," this person thought something almost defiant. "Fine, I'm at my worst. This is exactly when I need to ask." And they prayed. Not a clean, composed, dignified prayer, a messy one. Tears on the floor, still in the same clothes, still carrying the weight of what had just happened minutes earlier. No waiting, no cleaning up first emotionally, just showing up exactly as they were, in the exact condition the whisper had told them disqualified them from showing up at all. And that single decision, made in the ugliest, least presentable moment of their life, became the actual turning point of their entire story. Not because the sin magically disappeared, but because the isolation broke. The connection reopened. And with the connection reopened, everything else, the healing, the changed habits, the slow rebuilding, had somewhere to grow from. Without that reconnection, none of the rest would have been possible, no matter how much willpower they had, because willpower alone was never the missing ingredient. Connection was. This is the pattern you need to notice in your own life, right now, today, this week, maybe even in the next hour. It is never the mistake itself that determines whether you recover. It is what you do in the 60 seconds immediately after the mistake. In that 60-second window, you will hear a voice, and it will sound exactly like your own inner voice, and it will tell you that you are the exception, that your case is too far gone, that this particular sin, this particular relapse, this particular failure is somehow different from every other person's failure in history, disqualifying in a way theirs never was. That voice is not honesty. That voice is the weapon, fully deployed, disguised perfectly as self-reflection. And the only defense against a weapon that disguises itself as truth is to know, ahead of time, exactly what it sounds like, so that when it shows up at 2 in the morning, in that quiet room, with that phone glowing in the dark, you recognize it immediately for what it is, instead of mistaking it for wisdom. Because here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you think about it long enough. The weapon doesn't even need you to keep sinning. Once the isolation sets in, once you've convinced yourself you're beyond reach, you might actually clean up your outward behavior completely and still be caught in the trap. You might stop the sin entirely and still never come back to prayer. Still never reopen the relationships you shut down. Still carry a quiet, permanent distance from God for the rest of your life, simply because you never challenged the original lie that you were disqualified. That is the most efficient version of this weapon. Not a person who sins forever, but a person who stops sinning and stays disconnected forever, walking around outwardly fine, maybe even respected, maybe even looked up to by others, while carrying a wound underneath that never got the chance to heal because they never let anyone, including God,
near it. They win the battle against the sin and lose the entire war without ever realizing there was still a war going on. So if you take nothing else from the next few minutes of your life, take this. The emotion that follows your worst moments is not a reliable narrator. Shame will always try to convince you it is protecting you by keeping you quiet, by keeping you distant, by telling you to wait until you're better before you reconnect. It is lying. It has always been lying. The actual instruction, the one whispered by every scholar, every teacher, every verse ever written about mercy across the entire tradition, is the opposite of what shame tells you to do. Come back now. Come back messy. Come back mid-collapse. If that's when you're hearing this, come back without waiting for the version of yourself that has it all figured out. Because that version of you is never coming. Nobody ever figures it out before they return. They figure it out because they returned, in that exact order, and never the other way around. Think about every person you've ever admired for their faith, their peace, their quiet strength, the ones who seem to carry a kind of steadiness that nothing seems to shake. Not one of them got there by never falling. Every single one of them has a version of Ali's story somewhere in their past. A 2 in the morning moment, a rock bottom, a whisper that told them they were done. The only difference between the people who spiral for decades and the people who become the strongest, most grounded souls in a room is not the size of the mistake, it's the length of the silence afterward. Some people let that silence stretch for one night and then broke it. Some people let it stretch for 20 years, and some people, tragically, let it stretch until the very end, taking a lie they were told at their lowest moment and mistaking it for their permanent identity, carrying it all the way to their final breath without ever finding out it was never true to begin with. You get to choose which one you become, and you get to choose it starting in the next 5 minutes, not next week. Not when things settle down, not after some imaginary point where you finally feel ready. Feeling ready is not a prerequisite. It's actually the opposite. Reconnecting is what creates the feeling of readiness, not the other way around. If there's something you've been carrying, something you've quietly decided disqualifies you, something that's made you stop showing up to the version of your life that used to feel meaningful, this is the moment the pattern breaks. Not because the mistake gets smaller, because you finally stop mistaking the whisper for the truth. And once you stop mistaking it, it loses every ounce of power it ever had over you. Because it was never actually powerful on its own. It only ever borrowed its power from your belief in it. And if you're someone watching this who has never experienced anything close to this, who has never fallen this hard, don't assume you're exempt from the mechanism. You're simply exempt from this particular version of it. Everyone has their own 2 in the morning moment waiting somewhere down the road, their own whisper perfectly tailored to their specific weakness, built and refined and aimed with more precision than you'd ever expect. The armor against it isn't avoiding failure forever, because that's not realistic for any human being who has ever lived, not one. Not even the ones history remembers as saints and prophets and legends. The armor is remembering, right now, before it happens, that the moment after the fall is more important than the fall itself, and that the only losing move, the only truly fatal move in this entire equation, is silence. Here's one more thing worth knowing, because it changes how you'll hear the next whisper that comes for you. Notice that the weapon never announces itself. It never says, "I'm despair, prepare to lose hope." It always shows up sounding like your own voice, using your own vocabulary, referencing your own specific insecurities, wearing the exact mask that will be most convincing to you specifically. That's not an accident. That's the design. A weapon that announced itself would be easy to resist. A weapon that sounds exactly like your own inner monologue is nearly impossible to catch, unless you already know ahead of time what to listen for. And now you do. Now, when that voice shows up and tells you that you're the exception, that your mistake is somehow too big, that waiting is wiser than returning right now, you'll recognize the shape of it immediately, because you've heard its blueprint laid out clearly, in daylight, long before it ever had the chance to catch you in the dark. So here's the real question this leaves you with, the one worth sitting with long after this ends, long after you close this video and go back to your day. What have you gone quiet about? What's the thing you've been carrying alone, convinced it's too messy, too shameful, too far gone to bring back into the light?
Because if there's one thing every tradition, every scholar, every story of redemption across history agrees on, it's this: the door was never actually closed. You were just told it was by a voice that needed you to believe that lie more than it needed anything else.
Because that lie alone was always enough to keep you exactly where it wanted you. Alone, quiet, and convinced that this of all things was the one thing too big for mercy to reach. It never was. It never will be. And the second you stop believing the whisper and start showing up anyway, messy, unfinished, still mid-collapse, if that's where you are right now, the entire weapon collapses with it. Because it was only ever built to survive in silence, and you just broke the silence right here, right now, simply by staying until the end and letting these words in, instead of scrolling past the way the whisper always hopes you will.